Almost every human being that has ever lived has in some fashion worshipped their ancestors and honored them almost above all else, besides maybe in some cases a monotheistic God. You have to ask yourselves why this is so common. Why has this human institution of ancestor worship been so important to so many generations all across the world independently, and yet been so easily abandoned by Western civilization just in the last 100 years? And because of that, what do we lack? What kind of strength or power or pride or just joy do we lack because we don't think about those people, and we might not even know our great-grandparents by name or care at all about what they think? Partially because our standards, our moral standards specifically, have changed so much, modern people feel like ancient history and recent history has been invalidated. That because there were things like slavery and terrible wars and terrible inequality, that basically the opinions and thoughts and art and whatever of people that lived, say, more than 200 years ago mean almost nothing to us. They have nothing to teach us. They're not interesting. And there's something that we've moved past. And in some regards, I think this is true. And this actually relates to why ancestor worship can be valuable to all of us and be useful. Because if you think about yourself as a solitary unit, rather than the kind of blossom or flower or fruit of a long process of striving, in the same way that a tree had to strive from a seed to get a trunk, to then sprout, to then grow and get strong enough to bear fruit like an apple tree, so has your line. Your line has struggled from chasing woolly mammoths on a savanna to losing their teeth, dying at 30, losing half their children to disease, having to endure the Black Plague. It goes on and on. It's just not even calculable how much suffering your ancestors went through. Yes, consciously in the hopes of producing someone like you. Everyone dreamed of furthering their line, of getting a better life for their kids, dreaming of slight advancements. Now, obviously, a medieval person didn't think about advancement like we do. They didn't dream that, oh, I'm a farmer, my son's going to be a doctor. Probably not. But they did dream of some improvement, of some bettering. They're human beings. Of course they hope for that. But then for us to disregard all of that as useless and say, we don't need to factor that into our decisions at all. We don't need to honor those people and their sacrifice. We don't need to treat them like people who actually, abstractly, were thinking about us. Like that there is actually someone thousands of years ago who thought about, I hope my descendant 1,000 years from now is going to honor me and is going to do right by my name and is going to do right by all the woolly mammoths I killed and all the horrible tooth extractions I endured and all of the wars I fought in. The fact that we don't factor that in is not just a disaster for those people, God rest them, but it's a disaster for us. It's very, very lonely. If we, as modern Americans or Westerners, are both isolated in our communities, we don't know our neighbors, we don't know the people around us, and isolated in time, not only do we not know our immediate families, we don't know where we came from, we don't know how we got here, we don't know what our ancestors believed, we don't know what they believed about us and what we should do, we don't see any cultural continuity. It is absolutely crazy. And I don't like to be quick to say something is a Western problem, because so many things that people say are American and Western problems are problems everywhere, but this really is more so an American characteristic. We don't think about who came before us. The past is very, very hazy. And we've brought down so few cultural artifacts. Like in an American house, there isn't a coat of arms. There isn't a nearby archaeological site that can kind of link us to the past. There isn't a castle in our town that links us to history. There's nothing to link us besides stories which now modern culture have said are not good stories. They're not stories we should believe in, and that the American, cultural heritage is something shameful in a large part, which in some cases it is. But again, why should we throw out all of that as if only the last 300 years are what our ancestry is, when in fact it goes way back. It goes back to Africa probably, where Homo sapiens first emerged. And I honestly believe that we have a deep connection to these people. And I'll give you one example that has been passed around on the internet a lot, partially because it's so powerful. Our first human ancestors, those people that emerged out of Africa, are only 600 generations away from us. So all of your great-grandmas or all of your great-grandfathers back to a Homo sapien emerging in Africa, killing lions with spears, they could fit in your high school auditorium. It's that few people. They're that close to you. So why do you not think about them as part of your family consciously when you think about your decisions, when you think about what you're going to produce culturally, how you're going to spend your life, how you're going to try to advance your culture, your life, your civilization, your city, your town, your family, etc., etc. This is a real concrete reality, and it's ignored. Why? Because Americans, most people, we don't go to the retirement home too often. We don't open history books too often. We think history started in like 1920 or 1960, and everything else was like weird medieval peasants in the Egyptian pyramids. It's a very hazy picture that we're not linked to, that we don't understand that our symbols, our language, our culture, all of it developed from Mesopotamia, Egypt, through medieval Europe. It's all connected, and you see the same symbols, the same ideas, the same problems, the same battles, the same kinds of characters all throughout, and we're a part of this kind of pageant. And yet we don't look at our lives through that perspective. We look at the present moment, and you see this in how people deal with tragedy, like, oh my God, the pandemic is the worst thing that ever happened. No generation has gone through what we have. When of course, that's complete nonsense. Not that our suffering isn't real, but we act as though there are no tools for dealing with this suffering. No one that we can learn from how to deal with this suffering, with these problems. When in fact, our great-grandfathers and their great-grandfathers and their great-grandfathers dealt with things quite as bad as us. And they developed ways of dealing with it that we could learn, but we choose not to because we choose not to think about them. That's all.